First story: The Secret in the Backyard. 5 years ago, I was living a quiet life with my wife, in a peaceful suburban neighborhood in Oregon. One day, Charles Benson, a middle-aged man who lived next door, came over to tell us that his 14-year-old son, Lucas, had gone missing. Although he appeared composed, a deep shock and grief hid behind his silence. The case was immediately reported to the police, widely covered by local news, and the entire neighborhood rallied to find his son. My wife and I sincerely did our best to help, posting missing person flyers and spreading awareness. As time passed, hope gradually faded. Months turned into years, and no clues were ever found. Eventually, people began to accept that it might remain an unsolved mystery. Charles and his wife spoke less and less. Even when invited to barbecues, they would often stare blankly into space, or force a smile without meeting anyone's eyes. Charles would sometimes leave the grill, unattended, and disappear into the backyard, while his wife would nod silently when spoken to. Their smiles seemed hollow, and an uncomfortable, heavy atmosphere always hung around them. One evening, Charles knocked on our door, asking to borrow a shovel for some backyard work. Without suspicion, I handed him my sturdiest shovel. That night, while looking out from the second-floor window, I noticed Charles in the backyard, sweating profusely as he dug a deep hole, his face tense and anxious. Concerned, I grabbed another shovel to help him. Though each step toward his yard felt heavier, and my chest tightened with unease, it didn't seem like normal gardening work. Something felt terribly wrong. Despite my instincts screaming at me, I felt obligated as a neighbor and longtime acquaintance. When I finally reached his yard, Charles, startled, dropped the shovel, and sternly said, "No, this is something I have to handle. Please, go back." His eyes were filled with distrust, and I, overwhelmed by the tension, quietly left without arguing. Around 1 a.m., I peered through the window again. Charles was still digging, constantly checking his surroundings. When he briefly went inside, I sneaked into his yard. At the bottom of the hole, a black garbage bag was partially sticking out of the dirt. A chilling sense of dread washed over me, and I ran back to my house before he returned. Thankfully, he didn't see me. The next morning, the hole was completely filled in, and his SUV was now parked on the street instead of his driveway. Had he buried something, or exhumed something? After that night, Charles avoided me, and he never returned my shovel. I still haven't told anyone about what I saw. Every time I try to talk about it, my throat tightens, and an unexplainable fear resurfaces. Since then, I've been plagued by recurring nightmares, visions of Charles endlessly digging and pulling that black bag from the ground. I often wake up drenched in sweat, haunted by phantom shadows outside my window. That hole, the black bag, and Charles' expression have carved themselves deeply into my mind, spinning through my thoughts every night before I sleep. What exactly did I see in that backyard? Even now, the thought sends shivers down my spine. Second story: The Brothers with Guns. When I was 15, my family moved to a quiet town in Pennsylvania. Living next door were two brothers, Todd and Eric Miller, roughly my age. We hardly interacted, exchanging only brief nods when we crossed paths. One weekend, Todd approached me and my younger brother, inviting us to go to the river to shoot BB guns. Having little else to do, we agreed. On the way there, we noticed something odd. They were dressed in full camouflage gear, like soldiers on a mission. Their faces were stiff, and an uneasy tension clung to the air. They dragged a heavy duffel bag along, and the whole scene felt eerily out of place for what was supposed to be harmless fun. My brother and I exchanged glances, sensing something was wrong. When we arrived, Todd dropped the bag and pulled out real guns, not BB guns. Eric snapped a branch off a tree and flung it into the river, before lifting a gun and firing it across to the woods. My brother looked terrified. I immediately snatched the gun from my brother's hands and stuffed both weapons back into the bag. "We can't stay here. Let's go," I said firmly. Eric glared at us and cursed under his breath, Todd joining in with a sneer. That night, A sudden chill woke me up. An icy breeze brushed my cheek, and I realized the window was wide open. The curtain flapped gently in the dark, and faint moonlight spilled into the room. I could hear the soft creaking of the wooden floor. My heart pounded as I turned around slowly. Behind me, a whisper. Shh, it was Todd. I felt a hard object press against the back of my head as he hissed, "If you tell anyone, especially my deal, make sure your family disappears." Trembling, I whispered, "Okay." He slipped back out the window. For weeks after, I caught them staring into our windows at night. Days before we moved, someone hurled a rock at my window. When I looked out, Todd was standing there, pointing a pistol, laughing menacingly. I couldn't wait to move out. The night before we left, my brother bumped into them while taking out the trash. Eric smiled coldly and said, "Shame you're leaving. Hope to see you again." It sounded like a joke, but the threat behind his words was unmistakable. We locked our door with shaking hands. To this day, we never told our parents. Third story: the woman next door. 2 weeks ago, I was living alone in a rundown neighborhood in New Jersey. Finding a cheap house came at a price peculiar neighbors. Next door lived two women, one in her 60s with a cold, detached demeanor, and another much younger woman who seemed mentally unstable. No one knew their relationship. Often at night, the younger woman would scream and thrash about, while the older woman struggled to calm her. One night, unable to stand the noise anymore, I knocked on their door and politely asked if they could keep it down. The older woman glared at me and snapped, "Who do you think you are?" At that moment, the younger woman charged into the room, screaming, "How dare you!" before the door slammed shut in my face. Later that night, around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of soft scraping, and the faint rustling of fabric across the floor. A thick, musty smell filled the room. As I sat up, a prickling fear crept up my spine. My heart thudded violently as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. At the edge of the bed, crouching low, was the younger woman. As the light hit her face, she shrieked, a guttural, feral scream. I rolled off the bed and sprinted to the door, slamming it shut behind me and locking it. I called the police. They came quickly and took her away. When asked if I wanted to press charges, the older woman stared daggers at me. I declined. Before the younger woman was taken away, she had a heated argument with the older woman outside, their voices sharp and venomous. As she left, she turned back multiple times, glaring up at my window. The rage in her eyes sent a clear message. The next afternoon, she returned. From that moment on, I noticed her staring openly at my window, her hostility more palpable than ever. Even the older woman's glares grew colder and more threatening. They still live next door. Every night, I double-check all the locks. I'm seriously considering moving. Who would have thought that in a quiet, suburban street, such terrifying and dangerous secrets could be hiding right next door?